Japan seems to be whipped into a diplomatic frenzy. The country's new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has been making visits to countries in Southeast Asia and Europe. At the same time, he's scheduled to meet with US President Joe Biden and other leaders from the so-called Quad nations in Tokyo later in May. And the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs just published a new version of its diplomatic Blue Book, which emphasizes a stronger stance on several issues, including its relationship with Russia. What does it all add up to? Does it all signify some grander plans? I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Zhao Hai, who is Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Benoit Hardy-Chartrand, Adjunct Professor of International Affairs from Temple University of Japan. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Zhao Hai, let me go to you first. As I said, in the latest diplomatic Blue Book, Japan highlighted the end of what it calls its conciliatory approach towards Russia on the northern territories, which Russia calls the southern Kuril Islands. Japan also used the phrase illegally occupied by Russia for these islands for the very first time in almost 20 years. And for the first time since 2011, since 10 years, it says that the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. What does it all signify here?
I think Japan, after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, has significantly changed its diplomatic stance, particularly against Russia. Because of this background, Japan decided that now is not the good time to continue the negotiation with Russia on its northern territory, the islands that you referred to. And now, because the global community are sanctioning Russia, and particularly the Western countries, Japan has actively playing a part within that community. And Japan's sanction against Russia is actually even more strict than some of the Western countries like Canada and Australia. So at this point, Japan wants to play a leading role in criticizing Russia, and mutually, because Russia has banned main Japanese leaders to visit Russia in the future, and Japan did the same thing reciprocally. So I think at this point, there's no point to continue that discussion. Therefore, in this new Blue Book, Japan has made a further stance on those Northern Territory claims, so that in the future they wanted to start with a more hardline position, even if they can restart the negotiation.
What's the implication for China?
Well, I think Japan has long, in the past few years, when the United States changes diplomatic and strategic stance in the Indo-Pacific, so-called, Japan also changes position accordingly and has a the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. At this point, with the change of its stance on Northern Territory, Japan has also adopted a hardline position on other territories, including the Diaoyu Islands, the so-called Senkaku Islands, and also its position on Taiwan. So I think at this point, Japan, again, wants to play a assisting role, in some areas, even leading role in the defense and security arena, and building more stronger coalition within the Quad or other bilateral security arrangements with the United States.
Okay. Some people are saying, Professor Hardy-Chartrand, that right-wing and conservative tilt of Japanese politics is happening. Is that your observation as well?
In some sense, yes, but I don't think it's a new phenomenon. We have to remember that this kind of advance towards a greater role in terms of regional security for Japan started about 10 years ago with former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. He came to power in 2012, promising to make Japan a more consequential player in terms of security, and he took a lot of steps during his very long tenure in office here in Tokyo to make Japan not only closer to the United States, but also to make sure that it would be more proactive in terms of security. Now, what we are seeing under Prime Minister Minister Fumio Kishida is not a departure from anything we have seen before. It's simply a continuation of the previous line that we have seen with the ruling party, the LDP. So it's not a revolution. It's not a break from the past. It's simply a continuation, and it's also, of course, a reaction to the to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Without the invasion, we might not have seen some of the clear shifts or as fast as shifts as we have seen over the last few weeks. So
Right.
it is certainly a conservative stance, but not
Yeah.
as big as we might think.
According to the diplomatic blue book, the world has now shifted to a period of full-scale races among sovereign states, notably between the United States and China, from the one where the U.S. ensured stability and prosperity with its overwhelming political and military power. Zhao Hai, just a year ago, the wording was different. It was that changes in the balance of power in the international arena are accelerating and becoming more complex. So what's behind this shift in language? Is it laying the groundwork for further policy changes towards the right wing, towards the conservative side? Or do you agree that it's just a continuation, or it's actually picking up pace towards that shift?
Yeah, I think it's on the one hand a continuation for certain, but now we have acceleration, as you said, because if you look at the issues on the table, the Japanese diplomatic side and also strategic side apparently are now more aligned with the United States and playing a more active role in building the coalition, including not only the military and security side, but also on the technology and economic side, closer to the US. So now the concern is that in the future, those areas will see more Japanese activities. And now with the change, the new election in South Korea and in other parts of Asia, particularly in light of the war in Ukraine, Japan is in the position to increase its military expenditure and increase connections, military operations, intelligence operations with its allies and so-called other friendly countries in the region, and particularly Australia and India.
The Taiwan Strait was mentioned 5 times in the diplomatic blue book, a record high. Professor Hardy-Chartrand, how do you look at that?
Well, this is also, just like I mentioned, a bit of a continuation of the last few years. We have seen since about 2019-20 approximately, a greater concern, at least publicly, when it comes to the ruling party, the LDP, with Taiwan. We have also seen more and more Japanese politicians willing to speak publicly and call for a much tougher position of Japan when it comes to the Taiwan issue. Just one example is, of course, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who has been quite outspoken on the issue of Taiwan. We have also seen a shift in Japanese public opinion on this. Many surveys over the last year have shown that Japanese people are more and more concerned over Taiwan relations, over what's happening in the Taiwan Strait. And as a result of that, what we're seeing in politics is just a bit of a reflection of what we also see in public opinion in Japan. So we're also seeing, just to finish my point here, we're seeing also a greater convergence of views on the part of both the United States and Tokyo. And both countries have been, in many of their recent summits, we have seen Taiwan near the top of the agenda. So again, this is a reflection of this.
Taiwan is considered a red line, definitely, and China's internal affairs. Zhao Hai, how concerning is that? I mean, when Japan starts to talk about Taiwan in such a high frequency, and of course, coupled with other things that we're seeing, for instance, Japan's ruling LED party proposed to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP, doubling the current level, and Japan is also engaging much more actively with NATO. For instance, Japanese foreign minister took part in NATO's foreign ministers meeting for the very first time in history, and also other important meetings with NATO. How do you look at that trend? Is China being concerned here?
Absolutely. I think from China's perspective, Taiwan is an excuse for Japan to adopt more active military position and also trying to abandon its war-renouncing constitution. Right now, at this point, you can see that in recent years, Japan has increased the frequency of joint drills, military and maritime drills with the United States. And now Japan wants to bring in European countries like France and Germany and to be integrated into the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy.
And UK, it seems that Japan, because Japan also signed a kind of a defense cooperation with the UK.
And UK even stationed warships actually in the Japanese port. So I think if you add this up, and particularly right now, the Japanese are talking about increased military expenditure to 2% of GDP. That is very significant because if that being realized, that means Japan will be world number 3 in military expenditure. And on per capita terms, Japan will be 6 times bigger than China. And it will rank number 2 in the world. Why would a peaceful country with a peaceful constitution increase its military expenditure to that extent? And how much China posed a threat to Japan to justify such an increase? I don't think that makes any sense because China's military expenditure is only 1.7% of its GDP, and its increase speed is actually slowing down. So I don't think China really posed that threat.
Finally, Professor Hardy-Chartrand, what is the different voices in Japan? It's a controversial issue. A lot of people are protesting. What are you hearing? Keep it short, please.
Absolutely. In Japan, there is obviously quite a bit of controversy over this issue. I think in the Japanese population, there's a very large proportion of people who do value the peace constitution. And this is the reason why it's been difficult for the LDP to amend the constitution. In order to amend it, we need to have more than 50% of the population that support this change. And so far, we have not seen that. It's been around 30 to 40%. So that just shows you how, while there is some desire in the political sense, not in the population, we don't see that yet.
All right, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Professor Benoit Hardy-Chartrand joining us from Temple University of Japan and Zhao Hai joining us from Beijing from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.